Hi, everyone. Welcome to the January meeting of the Taos Archaeological Society. My name's Phil Alldritt. I'm talking tonight about water in the Maya world, the life force. So, the Maya world is surrounded by water, most of it salt water. And there are about 4,000 recorded sites known right now, but probably thousands more that we're finding with LiDAR lately. And a lot of these sites, the bigger sites during the Classic period from 250 AD to 900 AD, are in the interior of the Yucatan and the Maya lowlands and in northern Guatemala and western Belize and southern Yucatan as well. But these areas had a high concentration of population that weren't anywhere near water. And how they collected water and the architecture they used as part of the focus of this talk. So it's a question why the population centers weren't located near water. And that has something to do with the trade routes overland that existed using the rivers and central locations of these sites made the locations make sense. And where they developed and how they developed in these remote areas would be directly related to these trade routes that developed from early in the pre-classic, maybe as early as 1000 BC in this area. And it has to do with the elite goods that were being transported into these sites. These areas, of course, used rivers for transportation, but they also built sock bays or sacred roads through the jungles and used these during times, even in the rainy season. They were able to use these sock bays to transport goods and services. Of course, they had no horses or any kind of beast of burden. So they were using large trading parties carrying these goods and services. On the Sauk Bay trails that have been mapped just in the Yucatan, for example, are long distance in a way. And of course, these penetrated throughout the Maya lowlands as well. Through LiDAR, they're finding a lot more of these sock bays and mapping them accordingly to the sites. And they show a complex series of trade going on. So related to the Maya and in the Maya world, water in the Maya world, you have springs, ponds, streams, waterfalls, lakes, lagoons, rivers, seas, oceans, cenotes, sweat baths, humidity from caves, which are related to water and ceremony, of course, and then rain. So uses for rituals, not limited to springs for washing ritual clothing, caves for ritual ceremony, cenotes for ritual ceremony, and sweat baths for medicinal cleansing and ceremony. So the cenotes, there's 6,000 known cenotes in the Yucatan Peninsula alone. And these cenotes are limestone sinkholes that formed as a cave originally. The roof of the cave would collapse. They would continue collapsing to a mature cenote and then eventually become dry cenote in some cases as they filled in from the top. So Chalk is the rain god of the Maya, and Chalk is shown in many different modified forms, but he's always holding some kind of axe and a shield. And so epigraphers look for these modified variations of Chalk throughout the art, but art and archaeology becomes meshed and entwined, as we know, as we further study the archaeology and the art of the Maya. Um, it takes a trained eye to look for some of the signs and the symbolism and the gods, which are, of course, polytheistic. So there's over 200 primary Mayan gods. This is the chalk mask from Uxmal in Mexico. And this is the chalk mule from the Temple of the Warriors, god of humidity and rain at Chichen Itza. So chalk is usually depicted with a human body showing reptilian or amphibian scales, and with a non-human head evincing fangs and a long pendulous nose. In the classic Maya style, a shell serves as his ear ornament. He often carries a shield and a lightning axe, the axe being personified by a closely related deity, god K, called Balon Zacab in Yucatec. The classic chalk sometimes shows a central Mexican Teotihuacan precursor of Tlaloc, or the Aztec god of rain. Similarly, holding a shield and holding a baton in this case, but very similar references that evolved from the earlier Teotihuacan rain god and the upturned nose as well. So according to Maya cosmology, chalk was linked to the four cardinal directions. Each world direction was connected with one aspect of chalk and a specific color. So red was the chalk of the east, white was the chalk of the north, black was the chalk of the west, and yellow was the chalk of the south. And this is similar to the American Southwest colors of the Navajo also had a directional link where white represents the east and air and blue signifies the south and water, yellow symbolizes the west and earth and black denotes the north and fire or the sun. These colors and elements emphasize the tribe's deep connection to the earth and their reliance on the natural resources. So this is valuable for archaeologists to know when they're excavating that 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 when they find these colors may be arranged in shells or could be just different colors of rocks or other items in a cache or in a significant excavation, that these colors do have significance. So it pays to know something about the art in this case. In antiquity, Palenque was known as La Camña, which means big water. The site was first settled in the 3rd century, but not reach its peak until the rule of Kenich Naab Pakal, formerly known as Pakal the Great. This is the water glyph for the classic Maya. Other water glyph types, we see dots and waves in these glyphs. This is something epigraphers would be looking for to signify water. Also, again, in these modified forms. And then, of course, these forms are going to show up on pottery in the forms of, in this case, water glyphs above fish on a ceramic bowl. This is a rollout, ceramic rollout, but used in symbolism of the underworld too, things being underwater. A Tamzalkal is a traditional Maya sweat lodge. It's an ancient Mayan ritual designed to remove toxins from the body. Indigenous people previously used these steam baths to cure illnesses or purify their bodies after battles. The 4 stages of the ceremony are led by a shaman, which is a spiritual healer. And remember the Olmec altars from earlier pre-Maya sites in Veracruz on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. These earlier altars show Olmec leaders emerging from could be a cave, could be a sweat bath, could be some other type of structure. But a lot of times they're shown, in this case, the Olmec with a baby, Olmec baby in hand, basically symbolizing the fertility power of the king, I think, in this case. And you're going to see other altars with Olmec babies on them too. So I think in a way, these altars are metaphors for a cave where ritual ceremony would have been conducted, or also could be metaphor for just the emergence, the birth canal, the emergence of a child from the birth canal. But a lot of this has to do, I think, with kings, especially the male kings, trying to show that they have the power of fertility, and they also are able to um, control this unpredictable power of the giving of birth of children. Here's another king from an Olmec altar, again sitting in a niche, but probably a cave or a sweat bath. Another one, this is a similar one, the same king showing that emergence from a cave or from the birth canal in this case. The sweat baths in the Maya sites are easy to spot. They don't have any exterior windows, of course, and the inside of the sweat baths have places for heated rocks to create steam inside of them. Some of the bigger ones can be even included inside structures. And even the modern sweat baths of the Maya are rock shapes, rock structures, and very similar ceremonies are being carried on today by the modern Maya. Another item related to water are water birds that are shown on vessels and shown on stela and in different shapes and forms, and even on ceramics, carved and painted, where it shows the water bird having a fish in its mouth, or the water bird floating upon the watery surface of the world, with features of the present world and the underworld below. And here we have another water bird, probably a heron in this case. Again, fish in its mouth and floating upon the underworld, the upper world of the surface of the watery underworld. And this is significant because a water bird exemplifies a metaphor for um, occupying the three worlds of the tripartite world of the Maya. So birds can fly. They can also float on the water, and they can also dive under the water to, in this case, bring up a symbol of the underworld, a fish in their hand. So that part of the underworld um, is unknown really to most Maya, and they would have been fascinated by the underworld, and they would have been really the power and the purview of the elites and the kings who had the power over the underworld. So the elites and royals are going to use water birds as a symbol of their power. In this case, there's the paddler god rowing a canoe across the surface of the watery underworld, and he has a fish on his back. So in this case, the paddler god is showing, demonstrating his power over the underworld. This is burial from Rio Azul, and just shows here on the left side of this photograph um, the wave glyphs and the dots of the watery underworld where the king or queen is passing into um, during death. But also it calls to the imagination how the Maya are representing water, be it still water of a cenote or a lake or a pond or a lagoon, or the ocean with waves. So it's difficult to say what's being represented exactly. Maybe these waves are representing more a metaphor for the ocean instead of more calm water of a cenote. And you're going to see different water representations in Mayan art. And sometimes it's stacked um, symbols, and sometimes it's waves, or sometimes it's three dots in a row can symbolize water for the Maya. Also, we see in Tikal burials the metaphor for a sinking canoe being death symbol. Here we see a king in this top figure. These are actually carved bones from burials in Tikal, with the hand on the forehead, kind of a symbol for death for the Maya king, and the paddler gods rowing them to their death location. In this case, the underworld below, where they will go on these bones. But these were actually determined to be human bones. They were carved and then outlined with cinnabar on the bone, so it looks red in appearance today in the museum in Tikal there. Also on this bone shows a god holding um, a fish in his hand here with his right hand, and the symbol for conjuring is the symbol of a hand holding a fish. Kind of again a metaphor for something being slippery, something that's difficult to hang on to. That's been described by epigraphers, David Stewart and others, of course, as something that elites can do during ceremony, which is conjuring, and they're conjuring um, their ancestors. to communicate with them during ceremonies and rituals. So in Palenque, this is the Temple of the Inscriptions in the main plaza of Palenque. There's a lot of water in this area. There are springs, rivers, that flow through the site. In fact, 9 separate water courses arising from 56 recorded mountain springs bring water into the city. Palenque is called the land where the waters flow out of the mountains in the Popol Vuh. And the presence of constant water, even in times of drought, was very attractive to its residents. So in this case, probably Palenque was built on this location to take advantage, of course, of all these water sources. And here's the rivers, lagoons, and the springs coming out of the mountainside here in Palenque in Chiapas, Mexico. And even larger canals were constructed to control this water flow during the rainy season. And in the main plaza, it's interesting that inside this palace group, there's a small plaza area that's so small it doesn't seem too functional. There were some archaeologists there one day working and talking to me about the possibility of using this plaza to fill it with water. And then at night, it would actually show the reflection of stars. The movement of the stars we know are being tracked. The sun and the moon and Venus and Mars especially are being tracked by the Maya over decades and decades. And that if this was filled at water in the darkness of a site like Palenque, you would be able to see somewhat the movement of stars across this water, this pond. And there is a way to actually drain it and then plug it and refill it. And so that's what got archaeologists thinking that that's what it might have been used for. And you can see this is definitely an internal plaza of the palace group, and probably for ritual purposes, of course. And another smaller pond area, possible pond area in the palace group. So how did these sites that were in the interior, this is Tikal here, LiDAR image of Tikal. How did they collect water? Well, the site itself was elevated because they dug down around the site to quarry the limestone for the site. And then they built up around the site to make it so that the site itself was able to collect water off of the plazas. So when they did that, the floors, of course, of the plaza were plastered and all of the structures were plastered. So it's kind of like a giant tennis court where if slipped properly, would drain water into these large reservoirs for drinking and habitation and possibly fish farming and whatever else they wanted to do with this type of water. But it was important because they weren't anywhere near water, and water is heavy to carry. So it was essential that for sure in this elite area, remember maybe, 300 people are living in the ceremonial center with 50,000 people in the surrounding area of Tikal, let's say, and 30 square kilometers around Tikal. But water's still heavy and it's difficult to move. So the least distance amount that you can move, have to move water, the better off you're going to be. And they understood that, of course, when they engineered the site. Similar types of reservoirs around Tikal. Um, and again, from the lowered quarry sites, they built these reservoirs. So for the Maya too, water lilies are symbolic of the watery surface of the underworld and the earth's regenerative powers. So a water lily grows above the pond or the lake it grows in. The pads sit on the surface and the roots go underwater. So the water lily is a metaphor for the tripartite world, the upper world, the present, the Maya live in, and the underworld. In symbolism, also, the water lily has a cleaning mechanism to it that keeps pond and lake water fresh, and it even grows along the sides of rivers too, as you would see. The other thing about water lilies are that it opens during the day and it closes at night. So this also too would have been amazing to the Maya, that it's kind of a metaphor for the sun. The path of the sun during the day, it's alive, and then the water lily would go into the darkness of the underworld at night and then reemerge the next day. Very, very much like what the sun does for the Maya. This symbol of the water lily is tied into the jaguar water lily god of the Maya. And you can see the fish down here at the bottom. And so it's a sacred symbol of life, the water lily jaguar god, but also the jaguar, of course, is a symbol of the night, of the darkness, and being a lord of the underworld. So it kind of encompasses, in a way, the whole worldview of the Maya. And this stela 33 is also a symbol of has symbols, let's say, of different things. It has a shield and is a very imposing figure. This Stela 33 is from Waka um, in northern Petén of Guatemala. And he's holding what looks like could be a baton or an axe in his right hand and a shield in his left hand, not unlike the symbolism seen in chalk, but also on his on around his feet we see and knees actually we see fish and water lily symbols, as well as on his headdress another water lily symbol with a fish. They're eating or benefiting, showing the symbiotic relationship between fish and the water lilies and the power of rain. And it seems like it has all of these symbols going on in a site that's not really near water. So this site in the Petén would have been water collecting would have been important here too. And so um, this site also has um, different symbolism here, but in this case too, this imposing figure is symbolizing um, the power of the warrior as well. So, and the abundance of earth and fertility and agricultural success and all of those things. So this is a really powerful stela. So, there's a lot of art. There's a lot of interconnectivity between the art, between water. Of course, water is important to people living in the jungle and in a humid area. and they're growing corn, beans, and squash, right? So it's important that it rains during the rainy season and that it is raining enough to help the crops grow even during the dry season or the not so wet season. Wouldn't exactly call it dry, but during this time period in the classic Maya period, it was pretty predictable and very conducive to population growth. And that's when we see the majority of the classic Maya sites reach their peak populations there in the classic period between 250 AD to 900 AD. So water, emergence from a humid, wet place has regenerative powers or new life. So many rituals, events, and ceremonies are going to be the focus of much energy for the Maya. Emergence and reemergence of water birds, emerging from a cave entrance after a ritual. Ancestors emerging from a serpent's mouth after a ritual as shown in the Yashtilan stela. Baby emerging from the birth canal. Ceremonial participants emerging from a sweat house. Emergence of the water lily from its night journey through the underworld, and the reemergence of the sun each day. So the elites, the kings and queens and priests are going to use this information and knowledge to symbolize their power during ritual that they're the ones responsible for the rain coming. They're the ones responsible for the sun coming up every day. And their power and their ability to predict things like eclipses and other powers they used to use archaeoastronomy to make predictions are going to be important to their legitimacy and their power and their ability for their children even to rule. So water related to the Maya site in terms of functional use of water, the Maya had large canoes, transport canoes, that were circling the Yucatan with trade goods. Now, as the trade routes in the interior became more dangerous and became in the 600s and the 700s, and more of the trade routes became ambushed as the sites were moving goods from site to site, the coastal Maya trade begins to pick up in the late Classic. Even though it was always used, it begins to pick up in the late Classic. And we know that the Maya are using canoes. Heather McKillop found a canoe paddle in southern Belize lately and shows that actually good preservation of this canoe paddle, what it looks like, what they would have looked like. And these canoe, of course, paddles are made of wood, which are not going to survive well in the tropical environment unless they're submerged in water. So we do find things like tool handles and other things made out of wood in the tropics, but it's rare to find something like this as proof of the canoe activity around the Yucatan and up the rivers. And what they're transporting, of course, primarily, but amongst other things, is salt. And they're processing salt on all these coastal Maya sites before and after 1000 AD. But these coastal Maya sites have always been trading in salt because in a tropical environment, you have groups of hundreds of workers building pyramids. They are going to use a lot of calories. They are going to use a lot of salt consumption. The salt can also be used to pack fish and other types of foodstuffs for fairly long distance trade over the internal trade routes during the Classic period. So the sites, as we were mentioning, are pretty much like giant tennis courts and water collectors. And the plazas would have been sloped in the direction of these reservoirs, all intentional by the architects of the sites. And when they were building this monumental architectures, during the Classic period mostly, we're going, and in the pre-Classic too, but it exploded during the Classic period in most of these sites. And they cut down most of the trees that they could see in this area to build fires to make the lime plaster. Now, the Maya didn't know that cutting down all the trees might change their climate and cause drought periods throughout this time. We're talking about, remember, Maya occupation of sites begin about 1100 BC and go to 1400 AD. So we're talking about 2500 years basically of Maya occupation. So over that time period, they did deforest this area of the Yucatan, especially in the Petén. So most of what you see around the Mayan sites are secondary growth of that subtropical jungle. But when they did that, of course, they didn't think, oh, maybe we should plant 1 million trees this year instead of continuing to cut down trees. Of course, they didn't do that. So they failed to adapt their technology to their building program. And eventually, that is going to cause a collapse of the classic Maya sites, the major occupation zones in the Yucatan, and a movement towards the coastal sites where they had resources from maritime fish, turtles, manatees, any other kind of fish they could catch off the coast around the Yucatan. And of course, the fish in the rivers that were already there nearby the coastal sites. So the Maya, we know because the Spanish are recording. This is a mural from Chichen Itza in the post-classic. We know that the Maya are recording, or the Spanish, when they get there, are recording the Maya rowing these canoes. And in some cases, huge canoes whereby they are full of containers. In fact, in 1502, Columbus sees and records these large trade canoes off of the coast of Honduras on his second voyage to the New World. And so, because of the subtropical climate, the canoes themselves have not been found so far in Latin America. They have found some examples in Florida in the swamps and dug up, and maybe partial pieces of canoes in Latin America, but no kind of large trade canoe has been found yet. So that might be in the future. As I mentioned, the paddle was found in southern Belize. So the Maya used water functionally, of course, to row in the rivers and for transportation, and ritually in their ceremonies and caves and sweat baths and the idea of the emergence of a child being born, and also, of course, for functionally growing their corn, beans, and squash. By 2500 BC, they're already cultivating corn, beans, and squash. So that's the majority of the idea and ritual use and structural use of water for the Maya and how they built their architecture around, in some cases, already established water sources like Palenque, but in other cases like Tikal, Calakmul, Caracol, um, cleverly constructed their architecture to collect water in these sites.